Do you know what the difference really is between grumpy and narcissistic? This video is actually a response to a great question we got on YouTube. Here's what someone asked. Everyone gets grumpy and insecure sometimes. So, when does that behavior actually cross the line into narcissism? And also, what are some healthier ways to deal with feeling grumpy or insecure, especially for those of us who were raised by narcissists and didn't grow up with healthy role models? Can those ways be learned? My answer, yes and yes. It's absolutely true that insecurity is common these days. It's a rough world out there, and grumpiness, also normal. Honestly, if someone never gets grumpy, I'd be more concerned, because that's not human either. Being short-tempered or moody can just be a reaction to frustration, stress, exhaustion, or simply a tough day. Now, narcissistic people can be irritable, and often are. But not every narcissist walks around scowling 24/7. In fact, grandiose narcissists, and even the so-called communal narcissists, can be surprisingly likable, charming, fun, the life of the party even. But when we look at vulnerable narcissists, malignant narcissists, or the self-righteous kind, you tend to see a lot more irritability. These are the ones who often seem perpetually unsatisfied, chronically negative, prickly. Their baseline mood is annoyance. So the question becomes, when does regular grumpiness start looking like narcissism? If someone's a little grouchy now and then, but they have empathy, they aren't entitled, they're not excessively selfish or arrogant, and they do their part in relationships, even if they do it with a bit of a sigh, then what you've got is just a grumpy person, not a narcissist. And in some cases, that irritability could be linked to other things, like depression or emotional burnout. People who are going through tough seasons, financial stress, trauma history, relationship difficulties might come across as irritable or withdrawn, but that doesn't mean they're narcissistic. Now, if that grumpiness is paired with a lack of empathy, a sense of superiority, a disregard for others' feelings, and a belief that their needs should always come first, that's when we start entering narcissism territory. Grumpy people can be emotionally callous. They might say rude or insensitive things and not seem to care how it lands. That doesn't automatically make them narcissistic, but it does raise a red flag, especially if it's constant. So yes, a consistently grumpy person is more likely to show narcissistic traits than someone who isn't, but it's not a guarantee. You have to look at the full picture. Now, for those of us who don't want to go down that road, what can we do to handle our own grumpiness in healthier ways? Start by recognizing that grumpiness is a symptom. It's usually a sign that something isn't sitting right. So when you catch yourself in that mood, pause and ask, what's making me uncomfortable? Was it something someone said? Did your boundaries get crossed? Are you feeling overwhelmed or undersupported? Grumpiness is your emotional check engine light. Pay attention to what it's trying to tell you, because that awareness is what leads to better choices, kinder communication, and healthier relationships. Maybe it was something someone said. Maybe life just isn't unfolding the way you hoped it would. Maybe it's that heavy, familiar sense of powerlessness or helplessness that creeps in without warning. In your question, you mentioned something important. Being raised by narcissistic people means growing up without healthy emotional examples. And you're right, 100%. When you grow up in that kind of environment, grumpiness can become a default state, not necessarily because you're angry at the world, but because you internalized emotional disconnection as normal. That grumpiness might actually be the echo of a childhood spent feeling unseen, unheard, or emotionally unprotected. Or it might just be the emotional residue of watching grumpiness all around you as a kid, absorbing it like secondhand smoke. And here's where it can get confusing. You might catch yourself in a grumpy moment and think, oh no, I'm turning into them. I'm just like my parents. It can feel like you're trapped in the same cycle. Grumpiness runs in the family, right? But let's pause there, because in narcissistic families, we rarely see emotionally regulated behavior. We don't learn how to calmly talk things through, how to work through pain or stress in respectful, healthy ways. Instead, we see yelling, blaming, dominating, silence, emotional withdrawal. So when you ask, what does healthy grumpiness look like? Honestly, that's a brilliant question. Let's unpack it. Healthy grumpiness. Yes, that's a real thing. Isn't about being perfect. It's about how we handle it. The key difference is ownership. When someone's being narcissistically grumpy, it's all about projection. They snap, lash out, guilt trip, or blame others for their inner turmoil. Their discomfort becomes everyone else's problem. But healthy grumpiness, that's about awareness and accountability. You notice it, you name it, and you don't take it out on others. You might say something like, "Hey, I'm feeling off today. I think I need a few minutes." You might give yourself space. Take a walk, breathe, move your body, take a hot shower, listen to music, do something soothing, distracting, or grounding. You use the grumpiness as information, not as a weapon. It becomes a signal, not a script. And like all feelings, grumpiness will pass. But while you're in it, those old narratives can sneak in. I'm the problem. I'm just like my parent. This is who I am. But here's the truth. Emotions aren't identity. They are just messengers. You're not defined by your mood in a moment. You're not doomed to become the person who raised you. You get to choose how you show up, even when you're tired, overwhelmed, or running on empty. Now, let's talk about insecurity, because that's a slightly different topic, but just as important. Insecurity becomes healthier when we start thinking of it as vulnerability. It's not a flaw. It's a signal. 2. A clue. Ask yourself, where does this insecurity come from? What early messages shaped it? How does it try to protect me, even if it's misguided? Here's a key difference between everyday human insecurity and narcissistic insecurity. Narcissists are insecure, too, but they can't admit it. They hide it under layers of arrogance, perfectionism, and grandiosity. They believe they must be exceptional, flawless, adored. So their insecurity becomes denial. It becomes a delusion. It fuels the need to dominate, to impress, to silence others so they can feel like enough. But you're not doing that. You're asking the question. You're being curious. That's already a healthier path. So yes, you didn't grow up with healthy emotional blueprints. But that doesn't mean you can't build your own now. You can. And you are. Keep exploring. Keep naming what you feel. And keep giving yourself grace. You're not the problem. You're the one breaking the pattern. For narcissistic people, even the tiniest hint that they might not be perfect can set off a wave of rage. That's their default response to imperfection, intolerance, denial, or outright attack. But for the rest of us, insecurity doesn't usually come from some obsession with being flawless. It's more often the result of spending years, sometimes a lifetime, being told, shown, or subtly made to feel like we just aren't enough. A lot of people grow up without emotional safety, without feeling truly seen, validated, or understood. And for those raised by narcissistic parents or family members, that experience is intensified. You weren't just neglected emotionally, you were often punished for having needs. You were expected to shape-shift, to guess what they wanted, to keep the peace. You learned to read their moods like weather patterns, to anticipate their reactions before you even spoke. And if you didn't meet their expectations, you might have been met with withdrawal, cold silence, or even outright shaming. And when you did ask for something, love, support, space to be yourself, you were often told, in ways subtle or loud, that you were the problem. That's the origin story of so much insecurity. It doesn't come from weakness. It comes from surviving emotional unpredictability, from living without a foundation of psychological safety. Insecurity grows when we never quite feel like we're allowed to be our real selves. When we're constantly comparing ourselves to others because we were never taught to trust our own worth. And in narcissistic families, that insecurity often becomes a storage unit for someone else's shame. The parent's shame, the family's dysfunction. It gets dumped on you, and you carry it. Now, will insecurity ever fully disappear? Probably not. But we can start relating to it differently. We can stop seeing it as a character flaw and start recognizing it as a signal, a sign that a part of us needs gentleness and care. Because sometimes, being insecure has even felt like a form of protection. If we hold ourselves back, Stay small. Don't try. We can avoid the sting of failure. Or wise, the judgment and mockery from the voices we've internalized, often our narcissistic parents. But here's the good news. Insecurity doesn't have to run the show. You can learn to live with it without letting it make the decisions. That starts with self-compassion. It starts with noticing when insecurity shows up and responding not with criticism, but with curiosity. Where did this come from? What am I afraid of right now? Is this really my voice or someone else's? And yes, all of this can be learned. Even if your parents didn't teach you, you can teach yourself now. You can rewrite the script. You can unlearn the shame, the self-doubt, the idea that you were only lovable if you were perfect, quiet, or useful. Of course, social media and the culture around us doesn't help. We live in a world built on comparison. But with critical thinking and compassion, we can see through the noise. We can notice what's real and what's manipulation. So yes, it's possible. You can shift the way you relate to insecurity. You can meet it with kindness instead of fear. And you can stop letting it keep you small. Having narcissistic parents is a burden, but it's one you can put down. It doesn't have to be your identity, and it definitely doesn't have to define your future. Thanks for the thoughtful question. Keep them coming. I'm listening.